speak clearly and do not whisper. Secondly, please keep other sounds to a minimum. Whispering, shuffling of papers, and typing loudly on your keyboard may bring the camera onto you. But I'm not quite sure how grievous a problem that is. Thank you very much here today. It's always a problem in committee room number 1. Right. Bear in mind, please, the ceiling microphones are sensitive. Actually, I don't think they're secret. I don't think they're sensitive. I think they're in front of you and not on the ceiling, because they'd be rather a long way away. So we're not expecting a fire alarm test today. If the alarm should sound, attendees should follow officers out of the doors and down meet in the cathedral yard. So over to you, Justin, for apologies substitutions.
Thank you, Chairman. So we've had apologies from Councillor Hoy, and we have Councillor Stamp subbing today, and apologies from Councillor Robinson, and I believe Councillor King is on his way. Right.
Any declaration? Silence and that. And minutes of the previous different subjects. Right. Can I approve the minutes? Any comments? In which case I will sign them, and they can be taken as occurring. And of course, you will notice that the scheduled date for the meeting was the 4th of September, but because of the progress of the, particularly the local government reorganisation item, we are convening a week later in order to get to more definitely something which will be like the forthcoming business case, which we will be discussing at the Cabinet and the full Council next week. Right. So the next item on the agenda is questions for the public, which I gather there are none. So we're going on to item number 4, which is the first quarter financial overview, and we're pleased to have Adrian and Stephanie and the Cabinet member Chris Whitbread here for a short presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. I understand we're the warm-up act today rather than the main event, so I will keep this relatively short. Obviously, this is the overview of the first quarter's position. What will strike members from the report is that we're seeing the similar continuing trends from last year, particularly around pressures in social care and children's services as a whole. Again, as I think I've said, every single report I've given to your committee, we are still in some uncertain times, partly driven by funding reforms, but the hope of a 3-year settlement in the offing, which is something we've been asking for a long time. And of course, what you're going to discuss next, which is local government reorganisation and devolution. So we are in some interesting times, that's to say the least. The backdrop, of course, is that interest rates, whilst falling, still remain relatively high. And of course, we still have inflation above the Bank of England target rate. So there are the normal economic pressures still there. Of course, with interest rates, as we keep warning, that means that borrowing for the capital programme and such will eventually be impacted. But fortunately, up until recently, we've managed quite a bit ourselves to mitigate that problem. Obviously, we still remain focused on delivering our strategic priorities set out in everyone's Essex. And it's worth noting that there have been £60.3 million worth of decisions to support these aims over that time. We do at the current time face a revenue overspend of 7.2 million. That's 0.6% of the budget. As I said before, that primarily comes from adult social care and health. and of course children and families to a slightly lesser extent, but of course all concerning to us because they're the most important services that we deliver in many ways. But at the same time, we've also seen underspends from other operating costs of 2.4 million. So that's in the positive set of figures. If we then move on to the capital programme, as you know, we have a very bold capital programme. We are currently seeing an underspend of 12 million, but that's not unexpected at this time of year. Some of the drivers being Bewley Park Station, where we're ahead of ourselves to a degree at 11 million overspend, and then some of the other areas where there's currently slippage in the process, which is the Chelmsford North Eastern Bypass and the A127 Fair Glen Interchange, and of course the Harlow primary basic need. So they're the things that are actually exercising us to a degree at the moment. I don't know if Adrian wants to say any more on those, or whether I've covered them as a whole, or whether we're ready to take questions. I think we're ready to take questions, Chairman.
This is only the first quarter, as Councillor Whitbread has said. It gives perhaps some indications, but it should not be taken, I think, as a forecast for the year as a whole. So we'll be picking up trends. Right. Could you say a few words, please, about the capital programme and the £18 million towards the Chelmsford North East bypass? Because those of us who don't inhabit Chelmsford are perhaps a little rusty on this issue, although it may impinge on us more in the future. But quite sure why the variance there is 18 million, and perhaps someone could describe the project a bit to us.
Thank you. So the £18 million of slippage on the Chelmsford North East bypass. So there's a couple of reasons for this. So one of them is around updated contractor cash flow forecasts. So we're reflecting that now. And the other element is around funds that have been unutilised at this stage and are earmarked for later phases of the development. So at this stage, the plan is that obviously all needs to be agreed with Homes England, but the plan at the moment is that that funding will be slipped into future years, particularly in line with the contractor cash flow.
I'm glad to be promoted to the knighthood, Chairman. Yeah, a couple of questions for the Chancellor, if I may. One I ask him every year: slippages. What are we doing to reduce the amount of slippage this year? I know it's a question I've asked last year, and we've still got some substantial sums, particularly in capital expenditure. And secondly, indirectly related to that, the Chancellor mentioned about a 3-year settlement, which I think all of us would welcome. The only thing I would just ask him there is, will we still be around in 3 years' time?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. With regards to whether we'll be around in 3 years' time, if LGR goes ahead, of course we won't be. But you know, there'll be a successor council of some type, or parts of successor councils. With regards to slippage, you've got to remember what an aspirational capital programme that we have, over £1 billion worth. And when you look at the element, the size of any slippage, it's quite small. And you always find, as you know quite well, Councillor Buckley, when you're dealing with such major projects, you're always about to find some slippage somewhere within a programme of that size.
Excuse me. Percentages are fairly small. I don't know whether you want to comment on that. But for the first quarter, you are bound to get variances.
Yeah. Thanks, Chairman. Yes, of course, we have to remember we're in the first quarter, and we have to look at the whole year of the budget. And of course, in a couple of months' time, hopefully we'll be taking a report to Cabinet and to Council regards to the half year point, which will give you a much better indication of where we are. But yes, the slippage is very small when you compare it to the size of what we're dealing with at the county council level.
But
a month away.
Vance.
Thank you very much, Chair. Could I just turn your attention to slide number 4 on the presentations that you kindly put out to us? Just really, if I may, just get some clarity and update, just some general feeling about the 3 points that you've made there. What would be the effect and benefit? I'm looking at the last one, the 1.3 early intervention reserve. When the last line says, following decisions by Department of Education, that they cannot be funded by the dedicated schools grant. So the real question there is, what does that really mean for us? And what are we doing about it? And same with the 1.3 million above, where it talks about healthcare, adult social care reforms has now lapsed and cannot be drawn down. So what are the effects of those two things and what do they mean for us going forward?
Thank you, Chairman. Both technical issues, so I will hand to either Stephanie or Adrian to take care of.
Thank you for the question. I'll start with the 1.3 million for the early intervention and prevention and the dedicated schools grant. So the situation we had is in clarifying the position on the dedicated schools grant at the end of last year. The DFE was very clear to us that there were some elements of the spend that we could no longer charge to the dedicated schools grant. So in relation to educational psychologists, so we had to bring them into the general fund. The work that we undertook on the back of that was to seek to identify any other areas that we were funding from general fund first that could be applied to dedicated schools grant as a swap. And we were successful because the issue was just over £2 million. So we were successful to the extent of about 800,000 that we were able to do that for. But the balance we've had to consume within the general fund. What we had done, though, was this reserve, the early intervention and prevention holding account, was being used to support costs that we could actually charge to the dedicated schools grant. So we have taken the opportunity to swap that funding now, which means that the bottom line impact on the general fund is mitigated for this financial year. So that was the approach on that one. In terms of the adult social care reforms, so we have a principle in which when decisions are taken for drawing on reserves, they have a limit, a time limit. And if the activity and the ongoing costs are continuing beyond that time limit, our principle is to come back to request from Cabinet an extension of that funding so that it can be taken over a longer time period, and that's what that relates to.
But just come back. So just in summary, that last one, will you be having to come back to Cabinet to ask for that money? And the second one, the 1.3 million, do I take it what you're really saying there is, yes, there was some issues, but those issues are not going to affect us at all?
So we have, so on the, so the Cabinet decision that was taken for Q1 has already agreed these transfers. So that authority and approval has happened. On the 1.3 million, we've found that solution as a mitigation for this year, but we would have to look at alternative mitigations for coming years.
Councillor Corrie.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Well, just to make it clear that those of us who attend Cabinet would have raised all our questions at that previous meeting. So consequently, we've got nothing extra to raise today. Thank you.
Just got one question, and I haven't got the report actually in front of me, so I'm afraid I can't give you the reference. Many years ago, when I first became interested in local politics, there was the then Labour government's PPP, PFI deals, with which Essex had two connections, two principal connections. One was the Debden Park High School, and the other was the Bishop's Park School and Library in Debden. And I see there are still payments being made under this scheme. Could the officers guide us as to how long these are scheduled to continue, and what is the future for their, let's say, extinguishment?
Thank you, Chairman. A really good question. We will need to come back to you with some proper dates and such for you.
Be fine. I'm just obviously surprised to see such a legacy item recurring, and it might just be before Essex County Council is abolished if we get some clarity on that issue. As Mike McCrory has said, this set of figures has been attacked, discussed quite extensively, both in Cabinet and elsewhere. So I think we are now fairly silent on any other comments. So I think we can probably let you off the hook and say thank you for coming. Right. Right. There's Councillor King. You didn't have any items on the first quarter's outturn, did you? Because I'm just about to close the item down. Righto. So thank you all, the officers and the cabinet member. Thank you again. Now, Justin tells me that in respect of the next item, the leader can't be here until, is it 2:30?
3:30.
3:30, sorry. Yes, 2:30, we're already done. So I think what I'm going to do is to I'll take the remaining items first, if I may, the work programme and the date of next meeting, but then I'm intending to adjourn this meeting until the leader has arrived. So anything on the work programme, Justin?
Yeah, so work programme is page 21 of your agenda. Just for noting, really, the one change since it last came to you was we've removed the October meeting. Obviously, we've had additional meetings in August. So the items that were due to go in October are now going in December. So your next meeting will be 6th of November, which will be performance, and that's the first under the new performance system, where it's being segmented into the different scrutiny committees. So that's the change. No October meeting, and performance will come to you in November.
Yes, so normally there's an August break, but as you know, we had to spatchcock in an additional meeting on August the 11th to consider the LGR item as it then was. But it seems when the officers approached me and the vice chairman, it seemed expedient not to have an October meeting. But if anyone thinks we really ought to meet in October, please, this is your opportunity to say we should. Ivan.
Not on the dates, Chairman. I don't think I'm the first member to mention this, but the meetings that we're having in this committee seem to be keeping rescheduled to later and later in the day to suit cabinet members. And I just think our business shouldn't always be controlled by portfolio holders. They should make themselves available for when this committee, because it originally used to meet in the mornings. Now we'll soon be meeting in the evenings because they'll be busy all day, and it's going to get later. I've certainly been here for cabinet, and now I'm told that we're going to adjourn till 3:30. Well, I'm certainly not going to sit around and wait for another, nearly half an hour. So I shall be given my apologies for that meeting. Thank you.
I amend to many of the things you've raised, Councillor Henderson, but I think we have to recognise that the officers have an extremely difficult job. And we're not like other committees in many ways. We're not looking for outside attendees. We're looking for our own cabinet members and other members. It is a job that the officers have that they perform very well. And this problem today was simply caused by the concurrence of meetings. There was a Conservative group meeting earlier on, and I am reliably informed that the absence of the leader at 2:30 has only just been notified to us. So I totally agree with you. Those authorities who have not given preeminence to scrutiny have, in many cases, found to be failing on a number of fronts. So I think those that are in power do have to be aware of our timetable and should make every effort to attend. But more than that, I don't think I can say. I'm with you. I think we need to give scrutiny due eminence in the business of the council, and it's to my mind very regrettable that these things happen. Anyone else have anything on this issue?
Just to suggest, Chairman, that either yourself or myself might like to raise this at the Scrutiny Board and have a discussion there. We're told that this council takes scrutiny very, very seriously, is what we're told, but I do question that sometimes whether other outside commitments seem to take preference over the work of certainly this Scrutiny Committee. Thank you.
Councillor Steptoe, you're the other vice chairman of the committee. How do you think on this?
Yes, it does. Sorry, yes, I'm not happy that we have to sit and wait around. Well, as Councillor Henderson said, it's another half an hour or so that, we've all got to fight through the traffic later.
True. Well, I can certainly raise that at the Scrutiny Board. In fact, I did put it down for the agenda for the last but one, I think it was, Scrutiny Boards. We got nowhere. And I suppose the redeeming feature is that with Essex coming to an end in 2028, county council anyway, I wonder what the new 3 county unitaries will do. Will they meet in the day as we do? Will they meet in the evening? Because they're equally as large as the county council is geographically spread as the county council is at the moment. So getting convening a meeting in the evening may not be sensible, but that's fortunately for them to decide when they're set up. It is the congestion of council time is, I think, much to be regretted. And I do hope that the Scrutiny Board will take due cognizance of this for the remaining term of the County Council. So, members, I'm going to adjourn the meeting until 3:25 for a cup of tea and personal needs break. So see you all back there then here at 3:25. again, and this is kind of part 2 of the agenda and is, I think, the most likely substantive item on the agenda, which is the business case for local government reorganisation. And we're very pleased to welcome a fresh phalanx of officers and members, including the leader. So thank you very much. And everybody else. You're all welcome. And I gather we're going to have a presentation which Kevin will be introducing. So I think in order to save time, we'd better start as soon as we can. So over to you, Kevin, and your team.
Well, Chairman, thank you very much indeed. Not all of the team, but a big significant part of the team is here. And we thought they're here for A, to present to you, but also to ask any technical questions you will have. Of course, I will answer as many questions as I possibly can. What with this, we briefed various people today. It's about the third go at this today, but the most important one with scrutiny. Following this meeting, the business case will be published. So it's important you see this first. And you know, I was very clear, Chair, that everything we do has to go through scrutiny. So I'm very grateful for you having the meeting today and subsequent meetings you've had in the past and will no doubt will have in the future as well. So this is the business case for 3. We've laid out what I think is a very robust and clear case for that 3. I'm very clear that we don't deride any other business case that's put in. People are doing it for all the right reasons, what they believe in. What we do have here and across Essex is common cause. So when people say, but you haven't got a unified front in Essex, we do. So when we submit this, it will be with a covering letter and 4 cases attached to it, business cases attached to it, because we believe that this should be done chiefly to make sure that local government operates sufficiently and effectively in the future. So in that we have common cause. So the business case you will see is predicated on the ability for each of the local authorities we wish to create being sustainable, both now and in the future. All of the business case is predicated around the criteria set by the government, including the localism part. We talked about some weeks before the government actually launched a white paper or a paper on neighbourhood panels, and we have put in here on neighbourhood delivery committees, which we were going to do anyway, but the government actually have added to that and actually appear to be saying what we're saying on all of this as well. And I talk about this as being the case where we have talked for many years in this country, over 20 years, of bringing decision maker closer to the people, and it's never happened. It has never happened. This will absolutely, for the first time, make sure this takes place. This is also, I say to all members and all officers, both here and elsewhere, this is the biggest decision we will all be involved in. This is the biggest change to local government in 50 years and will set the pace for the next 50 to 60, 70 years from now on. So what we do now is fundamental for the future governance of local government in Essex to make sure it's fit, efficient and delivering services. You may recall, Chair, that at the outset of this and continuing, I've always said the first question is, what does it mean for the residents? What does it mean for people? We're not doing this because it is a nice thing to do. And in closing, before I hand over to the Chief Executive, I was asked just last night, isn't this really all about rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic? And I said, no, the Titanic is sunk. We're building a new ship, less deck chairs and more lifeboats. With that, Chair, I'm going to hand on to the Chief Executive.
Thank you. So I'll just take you through how we're going to approach this session. There is quite a bit of content which we're going to try and canter through. Then we'll pause at the end for some for the substance really of the questions and answers, if that's okay. You've got quite a few of us here today. They can introduce themselves as we go along, but we're going to go through the headline of the proposal, obviously the financial case, explore more on localism, which was a key inquiry of the last scrutiny, and we will be picking up critical services such as adults and children's, again picking up some of the key inquiry lines from the last scrutiny that was asking us to look at some evidence that was not available to us at that time, including the people to evidence. If we just move forward. So if you can see in front of you a very brief recap on the scrutiny from last time. I won't take you through all the detail of this, but just as a way of reminder, we wanted to focus more on the neighbourhood area committees. We've come back in the business case with people too. We'll be talking more about economy, and we've got a thorough section on finance that can pick up the other aspects of debt and the SIPFA reports. We'll come to the timetable, but obviously all of this is ahead of the major meeting next week of full council and then cabinet approval on the 18th of September. So I'll hand over to Tom now, who's going to give you a summary of the proposal.
Great, thank you, Nicole. So I'm Tom Walker, the Exec Director, who's been supporting Nicole on this work and leading the preparation with Richard on the business case. I will do a brief summary of the proposal itself, and then we'll take you through the elements that Nicole has listed. So, first thing to say, actually, this presentation has been done in the typeset and the branding, the business case when it's published tomorrow. So you're getting a feel for the look and the feel of the document. This slide simply sets out the contents of the business case. So we're really here signposting you to where you will see the greater detail. It's in a shape that I think you'd expect: the case for change, the future model. Towards the end, a shorter chapter on managing transition. If you can turn the slide then to the next page. All of this, I think, is information we have shared before. So the evidence base, just a reminder, we've had a number of top-tier consultancies provide professional advice, neutrality as a business partner across the whole of the Essex system, SIPFA, the Independent Institute, reviewing all the financial assessment. We've had further scrutiny and challenge from an organisation called 3110. The leading social services consultancy, Newton Europe, have done all the modelling on social care. We'll talk to you on that. PwC have been our financial partner, and then an organisation called Empower have done our work on looking forward, how we deliver benefits under the future system. So just to recap, absolutely, as we said from the start, grounded in the evidence and independent evidence by these organisations. If you go on again, Chair, I'll just very briefly highlight this. We've discussed it in prior meetings. You will see this set out in the business case, how we've approached the option appraisal. Inevitably, a business case has to have a lead option, but it has to be set against the alternates. This is how we've approached it. And in the business case itself, we set out those reasons, the proposal for the 3 unitaries and how we think it scores highest. If you flip to the slide, the format that we're presenting this, obviously too small to read here, but a heat map scored against high, medium and low. Across the top, you're seeing 2 unitaries, 3 unitaries, the 2 4-unitary options and the 5-unitary model. We're saying no one in the Essex system is promoting the 2-unitary model. And you can see a snapshot there, that second column in, that is where the green and ambers fall. That is the business case we're supporting, absent of red, i.e. low scoring, which we see across the 4 and the 5 unitary business cases. Again, familiar material, I hope by now, but these are the maps of the 3 new unitaries that we are proposing, along with key statistics. We'll come to it later, but powerful economic corridors linking the east to west. And you can see there the size of the economy, the sector strengths, the key growth sites, and the very significant number of additional homes needed by 2040 in each of these new unitaries. And then, as I round up in my contribution to this, 2 slides on the key benefits, a lot of detail. And again, this is showing you what will be in the business case, but the key arguments are around equity. So this is creating 3 councils of similar size, similar balance, similar level of sustainability. We think that the 3 unitary model reduces the risks. We set out some bullet point reasons here. Richard will speak to the localism measures that we've included. We think we have the headroom through this business case to invest properly in localism and in neighbourhood arrangements. And then there are no doubt debates to be had about what is the more complex of the unitary models to implement, but we think they're very powerful reasons why this model reduces the amount of potential complexity. most obviously because we're moving from 3 upper tier authorities with statutory officers in status quo to 3 new councils with 3 new statutory officers. And then Steph will cover in much more detail and pick up for me shortly the financial resilience. We'll take you through a few slides there. And then I've touched on this already, but some very powerful arguments on the ability to drive housing and economic growth, principally along those east to west corridors. So it's just really a recap and a reminder on the key features of the business case. And I am going to hand over to Steph now to take you through the finances.
Thank you, Tom. So in terms of the financial case, we can move straight on to the next slide. There's quite a bit of detail in the presentation here, so I don't propose to spend too long on each individual slide. However, the last time we presented to this committee, we hadn't completed all of the financial analysis. We had the high level initial analysis, but we hadn't completed the detail. So I will draw out the new information for you in here. The first slide is just giving you the high level context that you will have seen before. But this next slide here is picking up our model. And it's really important to understand that our model here is the first step model to simply work through reorganisation alone. So our first step model does not assume anything around further transformation, savings or approaches, or anything on public service reform. When you're looking at different business cases, this can be presented in different ways. So we just need to be really clear. This is our assumption. The 3 unitary model sets out a net benefit on this basis after 5 years of £86 million and a payback period of 2.7 years. Compare that to the 4 and 5 unitary models. 4 is a payback of 6.1 years. And the 5 model shows a payback of 53.6 years, so quite starkly different. And within the first 5 years, both the 4 and 5 models would not be paying back by that point and still incurring net costs. So this takes us to safe and legal authorities at day 1. The next slide here sets out more detail around the assumptions on disaggregation costs. Just to be clear around those, disaggregation costs are those that are ongoing cost implications of change. The transition costs are the one-off costs that will be incurred through the implementation phase. And the transition costs, although we show them as starting from year 1 of the unitaries, of course, they could start to be incurred from next year onwards as we work through that transition. One of the things to notice there in particular is our ICT costs. If you compare to some of the other cases and proposals across Greater Essex, are showing slightly higher IT cost assumptions, and those IT costs increasing for the increasing number of unitary councils. And this is drawn on a strong evidence base, examples of other authorities that have gone through unitarisation, and our experience of our own systems and changes and the associated costs of those. So really important to have that safe and legal for social care, finance systems, some of the big key systems that we'd be setting off on the right foot with. And phasing, we have been prudent in our modelling, we would say, in assuming that benefits accrue over 3 years, but we're showing the costs up front, which of course could be a slightly better position. But again, throughout our modelling, we're key that we are being prudent in our assumptions. So that's been set out there. I think on this next slide, we probably don't need to spend too much time on. I think you will have seen some of this before. This is the impact of disaggregating ECC budget spend compared to funding. And we've spoken about this previously. Clearly, it's really important. In our proposal, we're looking for the best balance of where spend is incurred, predominantly through social care, compared to where the funding sits through council tax, business rates and government grants. You can see on the right-hand side here that the disaggregation through current districts shows that areas like Colchester, Tendring, Chelmsford would fare most poorly out of that approach. And areas like Epping Forest, Rochford, Morden fare more strongly. So it's important in the configurations of the new unitaries to have a balance of those so that you look for the least, the most resilient and the least risky in terms of ability to cope with financial shocks going forward. We move on to the next slide is about debt. We spoke about debt at the last meeting. This is a new presentation for you though, which shows how the current district and unitary areas and Essex County Council itself spend on debt financing compared to their annual net budgets. Across the system, you'll see we have a high level of indebtedness across all authorities, over £4 billion, plus an additional 1.1 billion of internal borrowing. So internal borrowing, as you'll know from previous conversations, is measured against reserves and the ability to manage cash flows. If we have a situation where reserves are reducing, there's a lower ability to internally borrow, which means external borrowing would need to increase. So this is highlighting risk. You can also see on the maps here, the first, or the middle diagram of the map shows a lot of red on the west and the south areas. These are the areas that are most indebted and paying the highest rates of capital borrowing financing. That's in relation to their net annual spend. The right-hand map shows the difference that it makes when you apply the ECC level of indebtedness across. So it reduces the overall risk for all, but it's important to consider where those high risk, the reds and the ambers, would end up in the new unitary configurations. And our proposal seeks to manage those out as evenly as possible, so you have an equivalent number of greens to ambers and reds wherever possible. The next slide then shows the next step on. So this one is detail of the reorganisation that I've already mentioned, but just shows it over a slightly longer term with the payback periods. We can move on to the next slide, which just provides a narrative summary about the key elements of our financial approach that we think make this the strongest case around financial stability for the three unitaries. Size means that there are greater opportunity for economies of scale. There will be higher balances in terms of reserves to manage and greater flexibility to direct resources and prioritise within a larger area. There's efficiencies increased. There's the opportunity to look at greater savings going forward, and therefore risk distribution, as I've just mentioned in terms of debt alone, is more balanced across larger areas. We also think that setting up in this way enables the new unitaries to be ready to prepare for transformation and public service reform at a lot earlier stage than you would be if the disaggregation requirements were going to take a longer process, which more unitaries would do. So this next slide here just shows our assumptions, and we think, again, prudent assumptions on the ability to apply transformation and public service reform benefits. We've split them out. So we've shown costs, we've shown transformation benefits opportunity, we've shown public service reform benefits opportunity in here. You can see that on the three unitaries, that means that there's an additional £58 million of net benefits that's a potential increase in there above the 38 million that we're already referencing for reorganisation. So a total 96 million annual net benefit. We've taken implementation costs against that, and we've looked at a modelling period of 7 years, which shows that within that 7-year period, there would be £276 million worth of cumulative net benefits in this model, compared to only 64 for a 4-unitary model and ongoing costs of 109 million for a 5-unitary model. And the 3-unitary model would pay back within 3.8 years. So it's a much more rapid turnaround. On the next slide, we've just drawn together, there is a requirement from the commissioners for Thurrock Council to have an overview of all the business cases. We've had a meeting with those commissioners to talk about our business case and the proposals within it. And of course, Thurrock commissioners are particularly interested in the financial sustainability of Thurrock as is moving into a new unitary, and also picked up some questions about housing and economic growth. You can see the details set out there. One thing I would specifically reference, however, on the debt question, as there have been a number of questions about the Thurrock debt piece, we have a collective agreement across all partners in Essex and with MHCLG and the Thurrock commissioners to make an assumption about the position on Thurrock debt by the time we arrive at vesting day in 2028. And that is that on the back of the government stating in its response to our interim submission that they would continue to support Thurrock certainly through 26-27, and we hope through 27-28, that there would need to be some modelling assumption around the impact of that. Our modelling assumption, as agreed across all Essex authorities, is that the Thurrock debt would be at 50% of its current forecast level by the time we arrive at vesting day. That means a £400 million stranded debt balance at that point. And that would go into the South Essex unitary in our 3-unitary model to be managed in there. It would be a unitary with higher unallocated reserves balances than any other model being considered, and we think that therefore makes it much more resilient in terms of an approach. And the final slide from me is that, again, another MHCLG requirement is that when we submit our business cases, we provide very transparent clarity around the differences in our modelling assumptions between each different proposal. We are collating that information across Essex finance officers, and to date we've completed obviously our own on the 3 UA model here, a high-level review of Rochford's and the 5-unitary model led by Southend and Chelmsford. And we are seeing here that where those differences set out in a grid. Just a couple to highlight. I've already mentioned ICT costs. Social care benefits is one that will lead into the points that Nick is going to stress in a moment, is that in our modelling, we have made no assumptions about social care savings being made simply through reorganisation. We think actually that it's a higher risk, and certainly moving beyond 3 existing upper tier authorities to 4 or 5 would heighten the risk of performance being impacted and therefore the associated costs of social care. And we've identified a risk that if we were to move our social care performance to that of statistical neighbours, that would be a worsening position for us with a cost escalation risk of around £114 million a year. So we're clearly keen to avoid that risk coming to fruition. By comparison, just on here, the 5 unitary model makes assumption about transformation savings being delivered in social care of around £93 million. And that seems unclear to us, but Nick will say more about that in a moment. There's also uncertainty about a lack of implementation costs in order to achieve that type of transformation benefit. One of the other things I would highlight, pay harmonisation is a point that we've drawn out and been seeking advice on from our advisors. PwC very clear that pay harmonisation in new unitaries could absolutely be a risk. There could be cost escalation arising from that, but it would be an overall net position no matter what configuration of unitaries we move into. So it shouldn't make any difference whether it's 3, 4 or 5. By contrast, the 5 unitary proposal is setting out an assumption that £28 million of additional costs would be incurred through pay harmonisation just in the 3 unitary model, but there would be a benefit of £500,000 in the 5 unitary model. We don't really understand the difference in that, and I've already mentioned the debt assumptions. So I think I'm handing over to Nick. Or not, Richard.
That's fine, it's me. So I'm just going to cover the localism, neighbourhood and member dimension briefly. So, I mean, firstly, whether we create 3, 4 or 5 unitaries, they're going to be quite large authorities. So it's, can you just go back a slide, sorry. So it is important that we think about the neighbourhood dimension of this business case. It's also very clear that this is a requirement from government. So it was set out in the white paper, in a written ministerial statement in June, and part 3 of the devolution and community empowerment bill also requires local authorities to secure the effective governance of neighbourhood areas. So there's a requirement from government that we think about this. But as the leader of the council said earlier, we recognise the importance of this locally within Essex anyway. Indeed, it was a key feature of the Care Commission, recognising that unleashing the capacity that exists in communities at a local level is really important to a model of prevention that we would seek to drive forward in any new arrangements. It also reflects the evidence about what the public says is important to them, so that we know that from the work that we've done in terms of resident engagement, that there is an appetite for more engagement at a local level, more ability to influence local decisions, and a recognition that there's a gap between what people say is their current ability to do that. So what we've put in our business case is a proposal. It's really important to remember that it will be for the new unitaries to work out exactly what their local governance mechanisms look like. But we think it's important that we've got a positive and clear statement in our proposal about what a potential model for neighbourhood governance could be. And effectively what we're saying in our model is there are sort of 3 key components. The first is that our neighbourhood delivery committees are formally constituted as a part of the local authority's governance arrangements. Every member will be a member of one neighbourhood delivery committee and only one neighbourhood delivery committee. They should represent areas that are recognised as natural communities across Essex. So further work will need to be done to establish what those might be, and we would expect any new unitary to consult on that, but we have put forward a proposition to give an indication of the sorts of things that we're thinking about in the business case. And then thirdly, we would expect NDCs to also involve a wide range of local partners. So certainly local health and police partners, but also voluntary organisations and parish and town councils. On the next slide, we just set out, broadly speaking, the 4 key areas where we see NDCs playing a role. So the first of those is on service leadership. So for local place-based services, for example, the maintenance of parks, we're suggesting that NDC should have a role in the prioritisation of resources in those areas. Secondly, it's around influencing. So for areas of policy or service that affect directly the area of the NDC, we would expect the NDC to be consulted if it doesn't have direct responsibility for the allocation of resources. Thirdly, around community investment, we would expect NDCs to have a role in allocating funding to local community groups to support the strengthening of social and community infrastructure in local places. And then finally, where there is a more broad or general policy emanating from the unitary authority, we would expect the NDCs to be consulted on that through a sort of scrutiny type function. So strengthening the place-based scrutiny, I use scrutiny as a sort of small s rather than a capital S in this context, but we would expect them to take a place-focused view about the wider work of the unitary. And of course, if you go on to the next slide, there's loads of learning from other places. So we are not the first organisation to think about neighbourhood delivery committees or neighbourhood governance. Bucks, Cornwall, and in particular Durham, that's often held out to be a good example of how you can make these structures work. In terms, and we are certainly trying and reflecting in our proposal the lessons that we've learned from these other approaches. the key lesson, I think, is they won't have a serious role if they're not taken seriously. So this is about making sure that if we want these neighbourhood delivery committees to work, we have to consider quite carefully how they're created, and we have to make sure that they have the wherewithal to be effective. That's why we've got delivery in the title of these committees. And it's also a consequence of creating the headroom, as Steph has said, in terms of the overall savings that we can invest in neighbourhood delivery committees so they can really have teeth and get stuff done locally that's important to people. If you go on to the next one, I'll just move on briefly around where we are with elected members. So our proposal recognises the need that as we go into these new authorities, we think about the enhanced support that members will need. Obviously, members are the most important and most direct link between the unitaries, communities and the NDC. So it's really important that we think carefully, as our proposal does, in terms of the support that they receive. In terms of the approach around councillors, we are using the electoral divisions for the new unitaries that were developed as part of the 2024 Boundary Commission review for Essex. So we're grouping those together. We're also using the Thurrock 2024 Boundary Commission review, and for Southend we're using the existing electoral wards. So the basis is the most recent electoral geography that has been reviewed both for Essex and Thurrock. And if you go on to the next slide, the effect of using that approach is that we reduce the number of councillors, or the number of councillors is reduced potentially from 700 today to 284 in the new unitaries. The average number of electors per councillor will be 4,839. And because we're using the most recent Boundary Commission reviews, those are reasonably well balanced across our new authorities. So representation is pretty even across all of them. And then the final thing to say just on this slide and in our proposal is we have thought about how to enhance the support that is given to members, recognising that at least at the sort of upper tier level, they will be representing a larger group of electors, and therefore we need to think about the support that they get in terms of training and systems and evidence and information that will enable them to do that effectively. And then the final slide from me, and I'll hand over to Nick, is just on boundary changes, just to recognise that as part of this proposal, we are building it on the existing district boundary, so no changes. We are asking the Boundary Commission to review our arrangements within the first term of the new councils. We have flagged one particular area to focus on, but effectively we will be seeking the Boundary Commission just to review those arrangements, which is not unusual post LGR. So that is the proposal there, and I'll hand over to Nick.
So thank you very much, Richard. If we could go to the first slide on adults and children's. So I would open by saying that, or reminding members that Southend, Essex and Thurrock, outside of the metropolitan areas, is the biggest adults and children's and health social care system in the country, alongside Kent. So whilst the opportunities are vast, the risks are quite profound as well. So it's incredibly important that we get our evidence right and that we're factual and that we're based on well-established business cases that use data which actually passes the test of verification. Alongside that, we have a system which is not unlike other health and care systems in the country. It has significant pressures. We have an ageing population, which we know will grow rapidly until 2040 and beyond. We have a rising number of education, health and care plans, and the projection is for them to rise by 150% by 2040. We have many, many more people coming through into our system with complex needs, both from transitions from children's services and indeed from other care environments such as mental health, hospitals and so on. And just to give you a flavour of that, a complex case will cost between £5,000 and £10,000 per week. So if you get 4 you're not expecting, that can be a significant strain for any council, no matter what its size. We are also in a position where care workers are increasingly rare, and holding on to your care workers and making sure that you manage your care market well is one of the key indicators of success. And indeed, those markets with those additional demands are increasingly strained. And we see that particularly in the children's placement market, which is characterised by high costs around the country. It's actually very well managed in Essex, but the costs are high. I'd also point to the fact that the 3 unitary model is actually based on bringing those things to the fore and looking at how well we can manage risk, so that we create the headroom to deal with demand, but also the headroom to invest in operating models which are more focused on prevention, early intervention, and a split between the 3 authorities that means there is a fair distribution of demand and cost and resources, so that allows space for innovation, but also creates the scale that maintains collaborative arrangements between partners. To the next slide, please. We believe that models that go beyond the 3 will inevitably have higher cost bases. If I could pull out IT systems as an example, by law, adults and children's authorities must have a case recording system. It must be your system. Nobody else can access it. The fines are enormous if you have not got your own discrete system. We are busy putting a new system in place in Essex. It has taken several years to prepare. It will cost many millions of pounds. To move to 5 will simply just multiply those costs. It's just simple arithmetic. We also have very uneven distribution of demand and risk across Essex. You'll see in children's that there is a predominance of education health care plans in certain parts of Essex. You will also see that there's a predominance of residential care in adults, learning disabilities, placements, and so on. The 3 model does its best to distribute that evenly against resources. The 4 and 5 model break that distribution up into something that is less equitable. Having headroom also means that you can invest in your early help and your prevention services, your carers model, your equipment model, your care technology model, and so on. In Essex, we're quite lucky in that we have levels of investment that I think would be the envy of some other authorities. But obviously, those models are operated at a scale of 1.5 million people. And then there is complexity for our partners. The further we fragment, there are 5 acute hospitals, there will only be 1 ICB. I believe our partners in the NHS, our partners in the Mental Health Trust, our partners in police, welcome more simplicity in their interface with partners. To the next slide, please. This is really a continuation of what I've said, but fragmentation is not always the best thing for coordination. And we do need to keep alignment with our other partners' footprints as close as we possibly can. Obviously, the amount of financial headroom you have in the model is where you get your discretion to invest in those services that go above and beyond, but are right for people. Carer services are an excellent example of that. And I'm sure when you speak to your local residents and constituents, they'll talk about voluntary sector services as well. There are also, I should say, services in adults and children's which are highly specialist. Out of hours services, approved mental health professionals and so on. They are services that operate well at scale. And actually, we already have sharing agreements with our unitary partners in Southend and Thurrock. So maintaining those agreements in as simple a footprint as possible is important in the new model. The next slide. So we were asked, or my colleague Peter Fairley, who attended the previous scrutiny panel, was asked about the People 2 report and why we hadn't engaged in it. The simple and obvious answer was we hadn't received it. So we couldn't engage with it. It has now subsequently been published as part of the 5 unitary business case. We have taken a look at the model. there are a few things that concern us. The first is actually geography. And what the model does is it looks at small unitary authorities in certain parts of the country who have entirely different cost bases to say, large county councils like Essex. And it doesn't include key data from some of the shire councils and from the London councils. And that's really, really important because you can fit Southend into Essex 83 times. So I would submit that transport costs probably do matter. And missing them out misses out many tens of millions of pounds. So that's just so we have some factual questions. We also have some questions just about the data, and we've put that on the slide there. But I think, and I said this at the beginning, it's a large social care system, it's a high risk system, there are enormous benefits to unlock. But actually you need to get your facts right first. And the data in the People 2 report doesn't correspond with what we know to be the facts ourselves. So, for example, the placement costs in tendering, I can assure you, are actually cheaper than the placement costs in Epping Forest. I can assure you that's the case. The population numbers, for whatever reason, have been mixed up. We will talk to them about how they've done that, but I think what they've done is they've taken the overall Essex population, divided it by the percentage population of the district, not the number of people who receive care and support. So what it doesn't do is it doesn't take into account what we actually know to be the case. But we will talk to in the consultation period, we will talk to that and see if our assumptions about that are correct. It also makes statements in relation to savings, and it says that £80 million could be saved by moving to different procurement models. And if we could just move to the next slide. All of our rates are tested in Essex in the market, and what you have as Essex rates are an average across 1.5 million people. The rates in Colchester are very, very different to the rates in Alresford. What you see is an average. What we do, though, is we test each of those rates and we go to market on a district and borough footprint already. So moving to a 5 unitary scale will not release the benefits that the People 2 business case assumes, because we already operate commercially at that scale. So I personally am slightly confused as to how that assumption's been derived, but again, we will talk to them and we will see if we can get to the bottom of why they think that that is a realisable benefit. I would submit that £80 million is a lot of money, so it's really important that we get that right in a highly stressed system. The report also goes on to talk about smaller authorities being better authorities and with better CQC ratings. I don't know if that's the case. What I do know, and of course it changes at the end of every week when more reports are published, but so far CQC have inspected 66 authorities, I should say. Of those authorities, 19 were rated as requires improvement, 1 was rated as inadequate, and 16 of those, 20 in total, of that 16 were authorities of less than 400,000 people. 1 was between 400,000 and 700,000, and 2 were above 1 million. That actually corresponds with exactly the same size as percentage split as you'll find between local authorities in terms of their population. So that tells you his size really doesn't matter in this case. Could we move to the next slide? And I think I'm handing over. Thank you.
Yes, so and the rest of the pack, there's a little bit of detail about the marketing approach and then the timeline through submission and on, but we'll leave that for your leisure in reading. I don't think we need to take you through that. You've got a record of the slides and then conclude. Obviously, you'll want to have your questions for us, so we will bring to conclusion there.
So, Chair, what I would just say, as you heard from the officers, a brilliant presentation. I hope that's been helpful to everyone. Quite a long presentation, but very important because this is the most important decision we will be involved in. And of course, very happy to take any questions you may now have.
Thank you very much to all concerned. That was very concise and I think a useful update on the information you gave on the 11th of August. I've got one question to ask, but I'm wondering if Councillor Steptoe might take the names of members wishing to speak while I'm speaking. I think that would be the easiest thing. Okay. Good. Well, first of all, my inquiry is really contingent on the government changes of the last few days. The leader has spoken of his relationship and interactions with Jim McMahon, who of course was dismissed from his post or removed from his post over the weekend. Does the leader and other witnesses, do they think that there will be any significant change in either the timetabling or the substance of the government's approach, consequent on the change of personnel?
Well, Chairman, thank you very much indeed. Of course, I'm not in the inner circle of the government nor in number 10 when conversations take place. And yes, Jim McMahon was somebody who understood local government, having been a leader of a council. And although not of my political party, we had a very good professional working relationship. There is nothing to say and nothing that I understand that would change any of the things that we are doing, nor the timetable. The new Secretary of State is a former leader of a London council. The Minister for Local Government is a former councillor from a London council. They both have very good and well-grounded backgrounds in local government. From what I understand, and what I can understand as well, that nothing changes. In fact, it may be going even faster at pace. I believe the government wishes to do this. It has invested a great deal of time and money, and will be investing more money, as we have as well, because it is the right thing to do. So to answer your question, I believe nothing changes, certainly for Essex. I can't speak for the rest of the country, but certainly for Essex. And we intend to hit the deadlines we've been given. So September 26, we will go in. We expect a result in March. And then, of course, unitary councils will be then starting to be put together, ready for those shadow elections in 27. And there's nothing that I have picked up that changes any of that at all.
Thank you for that. Mike, who is the first name?
Thank you. Can I ask about some detail that's on slide 25? Can you put slide 25 up, please? It's to do with the neighbourhood delivery committees, which I still have some concerns about. Is it possible to put slide 25 up, whoever's? It's much easier to describe the question if the slide's up there. It's entitled Neighbourhood Delivery Committees. One before that. Thank you. That's it. The coloration for the neighbourhood. It's about the definition of neighbourhood, which I know we've had a discussion before on this. The blue, the second darkest blue bit in the middle, which is called Chelmsford. Question number one: is that one neighbourhood committee, or is that 8 neighbourhood delivery committees? Because it's divided into 8. That's my first question. I think the slide is ambiguous in as much as it's got one dark blue area, does that pertain to one neighbourhood delivery committee, or is it because it's divided up into 8 within it? Is there 8 neighbourhood committees? Because if it's one, it doesn't feel very neighbourhoody locally to me. That was question one. And then the follow-up question is in terms of where you said we're sticking with the new county council boundaries, and I think it's 3 councillors per, in general, 3 councillors per division. Personally, I prefer 1 councillor per area, and I wondered why it's not possible to split up those county council divisions. I note that the 5 option is actually basing it around district council areas. So they obviously feel it's possible to go down to a smaller level. So those are the 2 questions.
If I may, so just to recap on the neighbourhood delivery committees, there will be 2 in Chelmsford, Chelmsford City and South Chelmsford. On the question, so it's not one all Chelmsford City Council as we understand it today, which of course disappears under this scheme. In terms of the second part of your question, which is around, just remind me what you said, the second part of the question was?
3 councillors per division. Why not have 1 councillor per district, which would equate to about the same number.
So I think for ease, the government is looking at doing the county boundaries and also our new county boundaries, which we would have had in 25, we could still have in 24, we could have in 26 as well. They would be predicated on the basis that they are the newest boundary changes that have been taking place looking at populations. That's why. The ward system, I think, would end up having more councillors by doing that. This is a better way of doing it in terms of the number of councillors per local authority. So what we are looking to do is to make sure that we are cost effective. We're reducing the number of members in this case, as we are with officers as well, to make us more efficient. You know my view on this. I've been very clear. It means that there is a view by some, not here, that councillors are enthusiastic amateurs. Far from it. I've seen some incredible decisions taken in this authority that I would challenge any FTSE 100 company board to do. And the calibre and quality of people is important. I also think it's important they are remunerated correctly in order that people could either swap or do part-time careers elsewhere while doing this job. I think that's hugely important. That's something you do because you're either retired, just retired, or you're able to do it because you run your own business. I think it's important to be open to all and remunerated correctly, since we are operating in a daytime system. So I hope that helps you, but certainly in our discussions with government, it is the county boundaries, the new ones, that will form the basis of the new shadow authorities. What I then suspect will take place will be boundary reviews for the new unitaries once they're up and running, and then they can realign them as they wish.
Can I follow up, please? Yeah. So on the second part of the question, yeah, I agree that the 5 approach does actually end up with more councillors, but that's predominantly because they've chosen to do 2 councillors per district, whereas we're equating as three per division. We're actually equating to 1 councillor per district. So I still think there could be an option, but I take your point that could be done eventually. There could be an option to get that right number, but in a finer resolution of areas. On the first question, I think you answered the question that the dark blue area is a neighbourhood because it's all of the Chelmsford and not including South Chelmsford. Given that covers about 8 county council divisions, according to that map, which I think it does, then, or maybe 7, then you're going to have at 3 per division, you're going to have 21 councillors. It doesn't feel very local to me. That would be my. I expected local to be something more like North Chelmsford, South. I'm sorry, maybe there is a South. North Chelmsford, East Chelmsford, West Chelmsford. So it doesn't. But I do note it's indicative. But I would have liked to have seen a neighbourhood delivery committee made up of 21 councillors. I can see that not working too well, but that's a comment from me. Thank you.
No, thank you for my answer to the question, Chair. So it's all, of course, entirely up to how you wish to interpret it. These are not local highways panels. These are not parish councils. These are not town councils. And of course, you have a sense of place here when you're trying to achieve these things. I've mentioned before, this is I think the first time ever we have achieved the ability to make local decisions in local areas by locally elected people in a way we don't at the moment, or have never done. And I think this now returns it to that. Now, bearing in mind there will be certain powers we are proposing that they have and the budgets to go with it, that is hugely important, cannot be done at the moment. I think it is fair, even if you have the fire bottle, people are too far removed away to make those sort of local decisions on finger posts and sulcut, as I keep being told in urban areas, fly tipping in an area, for instance, that takes a whole rigmarole to seem to get that sorted out, can be done locally by those neighbourhood delivery panels. I would also predicate all of this by saying we are putting it in the business case. The new unitaries are sovereign, and they, of course, can decide whether to do it. But this is not a million miles away, in fact, very close to what the government has proposed in their paper as well. Therefore, I suspect if they choose our model, they would expect the unitaries to do this. But we cannot insist from Essex County Council that they do. It's in the business case to make sure that it is picked up. But I stress again, what we are proposing here is real localism that currently is not delivered at the moment, or would be delivered under certainly the 5 case, and I haven't seen the other 2 yet, but what they're proposing as well.
Just sort of Buckley is next on the list.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've actually got three different questions to ask. One relates actually to Councillor Steele's point, and partly the leader has responded to that, and that's over the neighbourhood delivery committees. And my understanding is that it will be for the new unitary authorities to determine what the methodology is to actually make those localised, if that's the right word, decisions. And I would like to know whether the leader would be seeking for the government to give some sort of direction to the new unitaries in terms of what level of delegated powers they will have and how they will be constituted. And I say this having been a Basildon councillor for many years and an experience and absolute abhorrence of the methodology of area committees, as they were called in that area, where any decision was overruled by the administration. If you have in local democracy, let's have local democracy. Do you want all three questions at once, Chairman?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Second point, after we've gone through this phase, and in principle, I'm supportive of the three unitary model. The government will go out to consultation potentially on multiple models. It would be very easy for some that don't like the three model to say, well, wouldn't it be a lot more local if we had 4 or 5 or even 6, 7, 8 or 9? What will this authority be doing in terms of supporting the case? Because quite clearly the public at the moment do not understand what is meant by local government reorganisation, nor do they understand what the implications of it may be. And the final question relates to Thurrock. And within the report, it was mentioned there's a presumption that Thurrock's debt will be down to 400 million, which would end up in the South Local Authority. And I'm just mindful of the fact that our neighbours in Rochford have got no debt. And it just seems an unfair imposition on the residents of that borough that they take on a share of £400 million when they've had no benefit whatsoever from it. So I'd like to hear what the leader has to say, Chairman.
Yes, Chairman, I did actually indicate, could we take each question at a time? Because there's quite a lot to do it, and it'd be great if we could to make sure we answer it properly. However, to answer the question, absolutely, it is not a business case. What we believe is the best business case to put forward, and we urge the government to ask the new unitaries to do that on the local neighbourhood delivery committees. But we can't insist. The point I'm making is I can't tell them what to do, because very shortly I will no longer be the leader of Essex County Council, whether by the ballot box or by the group or by the non-existence of Essex County Council. Therefore, I can't insist. I can't impose that onto any new unitary council. But as I mentioned before, I would absolutely expect if the government went for our model, they would insist that the neighbourhood delivery committees were laid out as they were in our business case, and our methodology is quite sound on that, with a very clear list of what the powers are, what the budget will be in order to do that. I don't know what the government's going to do on the proposals. If I look at Surrey, then they had 3 proposals originally put in. One of them was dismissed by the government, and they've consulted on 2. Whether the government decides to consult on more than 2, 3 or 4 in Essex, I don't know. I just don't know. And I'm not going to speculate because it'd be wrong for me to do so. They will put as many as they believe are viable to make these councils work in the future, make local government successful in the future. In terms of the public, no. I mean, actually, the public shouldn't need to worry about local government. If it's doing its job properly, it should run like clockwork, shouldn't it? And for me, the most important thing is the only change people should see if we get this absolutely right is maybe the logo and badge on the side of their waste collection vehicle, because we're doing it so well and so efficient for them. That is very important for me. I can't tell you, as I said, how many proposals will go forward, but it certainly would be the best cases I would have thought. And certainly we've seen, although we haven't run through this, and we will at some stage, run through the marketing campaign on this. This isn't just another local government campaign, There have been very good ones. As we know, this will be very clear from our point of view, very clear what this is going to be, to explain to people what the changes are that are coming and how it affects them. Remember, I've always started this conversation, not everyone has, but I have, with what does it mean for taxpayers, the people, residents? That's what is the most important question. And I've always said, if this adds up to there's no point doing it, we won't do it. But we know it is worth doing, simply because local government, although we are efficient in Essex, one of the best councils in the country, but we know that if we carry on like this, we are simply going to run out of money because the demands on the services are too great. And we know councils have already been in that situation. Some of it is not their fault. That's happened because of just the sheer number of scale of services. But we know with the ageing population, really good thing. Of course, people living longer, but of course, we've got to make sure we have the adequate social care in place to do that. And also, of course, with new housing numbers and more people moving into the county, then there'll be greater demand on services such as highways, education, skills, all these things that go with that. And we've got to make sure we are fit and really prepared. Local government and the system has been around for 50 years. Very good. But 50 years, if you're a business and you don't change your operating model, I suggest you go bust. Hey. On Thurrock, I will let the finance officers answer this, but I've been very clear that we do not, and I would not enter something that would make other parts of Essex have to pay for the Thurrock debt. While it falls within the Southern Unitary case here, it would be for that part of Essex to pay for that debt until it is paid off. I will let maybe Steph to explain that a bit further. So when we say it falls in, by the very geography, it's in the Southern Unitary area. However, it is not for the residents of elsewhere to pay for that debt. It is for the area concerned to pay for that debt, and that's how the local council tax would be collected, and until the equalisation hit the 7 years. Steph.
Thank you, Kevin. So the Thurrock debt position, because we keep talking about the stranded Thurrock debt. So this is the debt that is being supported through exceptional financial support arrangements with the government currently, and this is where we need to be clear around that compared to debt that is already being managed across the rest of Greater Essex. So yes, we have a modelling assumption, as I set out, that there'll be 400 million residual debt. We've also made a modelling assumption on that equates to about £33 million per year of revenue costs. And so, of course, in the first instance, we would be expecting that South Unitary to take advantage of any of the benefits of reorganisation that we've set out in our modelling to help support that. We don't know what the support from government is going to be between now and vesting day. Our modelling assumption could be vastly out. It could be too optimistic or too pessimistic. We just don't know. So that there are lots of things still to be resolved on that. There are council tax decisions to be taken going forward that could help support that. Again, we don't know how that will model through at this stage. And then the ability to move into transformation and public service reform with greater benefits should enable all unitaries to, again, look at having the ability to generate savings to reinvest back into services. And the first call on all of these savings that will be generated will be mitigating their funding gaps, as it would be now.
King is the next on the list. David.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Chair. Just switching it off over there. Don't blame him either, I would too. Can I just ask a sort of an in principle way of working question first? Because Kevin, you and I in particular pushed hard to make sure that the key questions were identified early and that we addressed them across the piece, and that through LC, Essex Leaders and Chief Execs, we tried to have as much commonality of approach as possible, and we can have a view about that. I'd just be interested when we have got some fairly important differences, although the numbers are still relatively small, subject to the overall scale. They kind of matter, and they matter presentationally. And I've seen members get themselves well, a muddle is easy given the complexity, and I'll admit to a bit of it myself. Get in a muddle about those differences, which do look, as I say, can look quite significant. So can I just ask how the ways of working have looked, given that we've got finance officers across the county working together? I'm kind of disappointed, perhaps collectively, that we've ended up with some differences we can't explain to each other about approach, of which the most fundamental is this the case for five view, that smaller can do better based upon national evidence. And I've heard Nick talk to this. So could we talk a little bit about the structural piece, how we've worked? What's our view on the national evidence rather than, if you like, an interpretation of it locally? And then I may have a supplementary if I might. Thank you.
Well, I will start off then, and I'll ask Nick just to answer your point about what he said, because I think actually that's not quite what he said, so he'll be able to answer that. Look, we have shared information. We have been very clear across the piece. As I said, there is common cause here. We have come to different conclusions. I'll be very fair and frank and honest. I think in some cases a political decision was made on the number of unitaries, and then the figures have been fitted around that. I'll be very blunt. I think that's right. And I've said that before, and I'll say it again. We didn't do that. I was very clear. I waited. I wanted to see all the evidence, I being a leader, but the cabinet as well here at Essex, and our partners who wanted to work with us as well, wanted to see the evidence first. And that evidence has led us to believe that 3 is the best case for all the reasons you have heard. No one's falling out at all, or certainly I'm not falling out with anyone with this, and I've not seen it elsewhere at our LC meetings. They have been very well conducted, information has been shared, and we just have a different view how we get there. But as I said, I think there is an element of there being political ideology involved in that, as opposed to absolutely how we're going to deliver the services. And I think it's quite simple, and I say this before I go to Nick. Currently, in this county, in Greater Essex, there are 3 DASs, 3 DCSs. There will be, under our model, if you go to 5, you just increase the costs. And you can go to highways, you can go to education, all this you can go. The more councils you have, the greater the cost will be, the greater the time of payback will be. And also, more importantly, is there sufficient council tax base in those 5 unitaries to pay for the services now and in the future? And that is a key question that I really don't think is answered in the case I've seen for 5, in my view, I have to say. Let me go to Nick now.
So thank you. I think I'd start by just reminding members of things I've said before. I have the deepest respect for my colleagues in other local authorities. We work well together. I'm the National Policy Trustee for Social Services. It's my job to try and make sure that everybody's case is heard. And I've also said this before, give me a challenge and I'll find the national evidence that you need to make the challenge. The national evidence basket is really, really wide. The report and the five business case selects certain bits of national evidence. Other business cases point to other bits of national evidence. I think we're better off looking at Essex, Southend and Thurrock evidence, because that's factual. So what the People 2 business case does is it looks at the costs of certain types of local authorities and said, well, if everybody was that size, you'd have the same costs. But it doesn't matter how many times you divide Essex, it's never going to be as big as Wigan. And it's never going to have the same population density. And that's why you get the cost difference. So it's not that I'm saying that evidence isn't correct. It's factually correct. It just doesn't apply to Essex. That's really why I'm saying it. And that's just the case. It's empirically the case. So as I said earlier, you can fit Southend into Essex 83 times. So they don't have transport costs in the way that Essex has transport costs. I think the other thing, though, on care costs, which is really, really important to remember, is that Essex County Council took a decision to move to the government's fair cost of care. So when we got grants to pass on to pay for holiday pay, travel costs, sickness pay and training, we put them into the rates that we paid providers. And that means, hopefully, and you can see it in the CQC data, we have high quality of provision. Not all local authorities were in the financial position to pay those rates. So their costs are lower because they don't pay the same rate to their providers, so their care costs and their care market costs are different because their wages are lower. So it's a much, much more complicated and subtle argument than you would derive from just reading the People 2 report.
Mr. Guglielmi.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to begin to thank officers for the most compelling presentation I've had so far. If ever there was a doubt, not that I had many doubts for the Model 3, your presentations completely erased those. And I wonder if many of our colleagues on districts receive the same presentation that might just put their mind at ease with the facts and figures you come out. One of the areas that I'm most concerned, and looking around the room, I'm the only member here that sits on the co-parenting panel, which is one of the most costly statutory service that this council has to deliver, and how that's going to be almost impossible to be split up. And I'm heartened by Nick, who talked about specialist services which are already been shared, the shared agreement with Southend and Thurrock. And this is the mantra I've always said right from the offset. There's some areas that you will not be able to split up. You will have to elect one unitary that will continue to deliver those services, because that is such a complex area. There are other areas, of course, but the children in care, we got 1,100, around about 1,100, and say roughly every single week we've got to cater for them, and the cost of them could run into £5,000, £6,000, £7,000 per week for each one of them. And when you multiply, you end up with hundreds of millions of pounds on there. So to split up and and also where the spread of where these unfortunate children happen to be, that's another thing that's really need to be taken into consideration. So I'd like to understand, see what Nick's view on that. My next point is on training. I've really kind of mentioned that this presentation should be done. And I know there is a county-wide presentation that the leader is organised for every single district member. And I think will be very important for those councillors who are only members of a district, city or borough council to understand the complexity of what we have been dealing with here at county on the social care and children care, because there's very, very little awareness there. I mean, the numbers of councillors, of residents per councillor, for us, I've been doing this for a while, it's a cut. In fact, from 17,000, we go down to 5,000. Hey, it's good news, isn't it? Especially those 17,000, 2,500 of those I've already got from my as a ward member. So it really, for us, will be quite good. But there is a general awareness there lacking of the complexity that we have. So I'd like to the leader to maybe enlarge on what he's planning to do in the awareness things, and Nick's thoughts on the children care. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman. If I may, look, I of the firm belief that no one's an expert in anything. You have to continually be educated on it. So why be an expert at one moment, a few months or years go by, and suddenly it's outdated information? So it is very important we all go through training, whoever we are and whatever we do. And certainly we do that. And we have a very good member training system here through our democratic services. On this, of course, if you are a district councillor who's never served as a county councillor, you simply wouldn't have this information. Why would you? You've not served here. You will have a knowledge of what we do, but not an in-depth knowledge. You wouldn't. And there's some things people who've been county councillors, not district councillors, wouldn't understand what a district council would do. So I think it's very important that we do have this learning and sharing information sessions. You could call it a college, if you like, an online college. And certainly all those wishing to stand for unitary councils in the future, I would urge them, when we put this programme in place, and I do want it put in place, that they avail themselves of that information and knowledge. For instance, we are corporate parents, are we not, as county councillors? there's a really good chance that people won't really understand what that means, what the legal obligation, what that means, and decisions that have to be taken. So it's important that that is understood. I think what we have to get away from, and certainly I have always believed in, while of course we are a political organisation involving politicians of all different political parties and none, if you just stand because you want to be a county councillor of a political party, there are dangers in that. I think for the public, you have to have an understanding. And certainly many years ago, before I became a county councillor, I made sure I was fully briefed on a lot of the services that are run here and a full understanding before I arrived. I don't think I'm unique in that. Other people did it, and we need to make sure that takes place again. I'll hand over to Nick. Of course, what I would say is Essex has been extraordinarily good in our children's services and making sure children are not in care. And we have made sure that children are cared for properly without having to resort to going to care. That is why, per ratio, our numbers are much lower than others. Every number is a human being and a person, we should remember that. But we've been very good at that, and I'm very proud of that. And I want that to continue, which is why I would be concerned if the more you disaggregate that, the more dangers you have for the people. And I've been also, the one thing I have said very clearly, I only have one real concern of this because I'm probably the biggest advocate for this. I've been on this for 10 years and more. And now we're actually about to do it. But no one must fall through a crack because we haven't thought of something. No one, whoever that person may be, no one must fall through a crack as a result of what we're doing. So therefore, the implementation of this is critical. And that's why I think the fewer units we have, the better it will be for the public. But I'll let Nick give you a much more professional view than that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The leader has stolen my thunder, but I believe that's his prerogative, isn't it? Look, we have 3 very good children's departments in Essex. Thurrock is outstanding, Essex is outstanding, Southend is very good. The most important thing is that doesn't change, and we build on those strengths and we share that learning, whatever number of local authorities we end up working in. There is nothing more important than protecting the outcomes of vulnerable children and vulnerable adults. And we have a good record in all of our departments. I feel like the in-house statistician today, but what I would point out is that Essex has much fewer children in care statistically per 10,000 of population than just about anywhere else, and certainly more than Southend and Thurrock. And what that does is it means the averages become different. So we end up with a small number of exceptionally high cost cases, whilst others end up with a large number of much more distributed costs. So that's why local authorities, and that's why I sometimes struggle with some of the evidence across the other business cases. That's why the government divides local authorities up into categories, and you have families of comparators. So actually, what really matters is what the comparison on practice and outcome is, not the comparison on the money. And I think that's what you were asking, Carlo, and that's what needs to be protected, the outcome.
So now that Councillor Ball is back, I didn't want to say, yeah, we're very fortunate. We've got 3 cabinet members here today, which is, really, really good. Then another question that keeps coming up is the home to school transport, and also the transport in between unitaries when they will be split up. Of course, at the moment it doesn't matter because it all comes from the same pot. But once you get different, people travelling from mid to north or mid to south and vice versa, who's going to pick up those costs?
If I may, Chairman, and I'll ask officers to chip in if they've got anything to add. I mean, my understanding will be down to each unitary authority to have their own arrangements, whether they decide to pool or not, is a matter for them. But you're quite right, because we have some very rural areas, such as Uttlesford, where the costs for home to school transport are a lot more than, say, more urban areas, such as Castle Point, although not too dissimilar populations. It'll be down to the unitaries how they wish to proceed. But if you do it purely on a unitary level, and the much more unitary, rural unitary, their costs would obviously be higher.
Sorry. The next person I have on the list is Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, a fantastic presentation. It has answered a lot of my questions that I was struggling with, has answered. On a very minor point, Councillor Steele referred to the map on page 25. I'm struggling very badly with the colours. The colours are so similar, and being partly colourblind, I really am struggling with the colours. So just a very minor point. With regards to the transfer of social services and childcare onto the unitaries, I'm a little confused. The mayor will be elected next year and taken over in 27, but the social services aren't transferring to the mayoral office. They're transferring through to the unitaries. So if Essex ceased to exist in 27, which is where I may have got it wrong, who then looks after the social services between 27 and 28?
So just, if I may, Chairman, to assist with that, the County Council doesn't cease to exist until May 2028. Powers are transferred in totality, I believe, on the 1st of April 2028. The County Council will be responsible for the delivery of all services, as the districts will be as well, until the very minute that they don't. That's why in 27 there are the elections to the shadow unitaries. They will work in tandem. They'll appoint their staff. They'll work in tandem with the county and the districts in those areas to transfer the services, get them up and running. This is all part of the implementation I'm talking about, which I think we're already working on now, to be honest with you, to make sure that happens smoothly. But the unitaries do not take full control until the 1st of April in 2028, and then on vesting day, which is about a month later, which is the ceremonial time that the handover takes place. So there is no gap at all whatsoever.
So just to confirm, Essex County Council, as we know it, will it cease to exist in 28, not 27? There seems to be some confusion about that.
We will clear it up immediately then.
Yeah. Thank you. Right, the next one on the list is Councillor Stamp.
Thank you, Chairman. Leader, you won't be surprised to know, but mine is more about community. I read with interest all the local, the research that's been carried out from the National Centre of Social Research. And if you'll allow me, I just want to read 2 small paragraphs out, just 2 small sentences. And this is regarding the conversations and the things that they took part. I forgot what it's called. It'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, so impact visibility is crucial for motivation, with half the residents, 51%, saying they would engage more if they knew their views would be listened to and make a difference. And 44% want to see real examples of how public input has shaped those decisions. So if you bear that in mind, I want to read the next one, because there was 2 LGR research programmes carried out. I think they're very good if you actually read them all. And this one says quite clearly, consider local identities. Despite not citing preservation of local identity as key priority across our discussions, residents expressed reservations about impact of reorganisation of the attentiveness to local needs and identities. It therefore is important for local authorities to be clear about how the final decision is reached and be responsive to the residents' concerns about these changes. Now, if you forgive me, the reason I've asked that is that I was quite shocked at the smaller number of councillors that are going to be sitting on those area committees, what you've said. I mean, you said 2 for Chelmsford, but none, I presume that comes under Malden as well. So I'm one of those councillors, and my electorate is 19,000. So it'll be great for me if I only have 4. I mean, I won't need anybody else to help me, because I'll find it quite okay, because I do so much as it is. But what I'm actually trying to say is, how are they going to be represented in the 3 if they've not got a voice? And if I'm mistaken, you know me, I'm quite happy to be corrected. Thank you.
I think I understand the question. So, sorry, it's okay. This system won't be around. Let's do something else in the future. Anyway, in the system we're putting forward, your voice becomes more powerful in your community than it currently is, because you'll be making decisions in your community that you currently can't. As I mentioned before, I talk at the Salcott Cross urban fly tipping, all these things that may not seem hugely important, but very important to local communities where you live. At the moment, let's take some fly tipping you might have, right? You have to go to, first of all, is that the district council? Is that the county council? And backwards and forwards you go, while the fly tipping sits there. If you're part of a committee that has the budget to clear it up and deal with it, you make that decision there and then. That is the powerful difference that you have. So while you're part of a unitary that stretches from, as we're putting it, from Harlow to Malden, and people have said to me, well, they've got nothing in common. Well, you sit in a council now where decisions are made all over the county where they're part of one council. So let's take the district lens off for a moment and think about the place. It is the place that becomes important in those delivery committees. The place becomes important. And you as an elected member have a very powerful voice and decision-making voice that you currently don't have. That is real localism that currently isn't delivered anywhere in the country, certainly up until now to the other area committees were put into place.
I do understand that. If there's not many seats around that table, who says I'm going to get a seat around that table? That's my concern.
So you will get a seat around the table. But the very nature that you're a unitary councillor in that area, you automatically have a seat on that table. Automatically you're there. Under our proposal, yes, as Councillor Ball is whispering in my ear, under our proposal, that's what we're saying. So you are automatically there. You don't have to wait to be selected or asked. You are automatically there.
Right, now the next name I have. Oh, Ashley Quiggin. Carry on. I didn't know it's on the list.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the updated report and particularly answering the questions that we asked in previous meetings. It's been very comprehensive and a lot of my questions have been answered earlier today. My question's really about our approach to IT and what that approach has been, particularly in terms of IT costs and implementation time in the new unitaries. I understand that we've got perhaps over 600 different software packages and IT systems across the Greater Essex. And we need to harmonise them and get some form of commonality, which is not there at the moment. So what are the risk assumptions in terms of not only the cost, but the implementation time to get these systems up and functional? And should we be worried that we have got the full perspective on this and not just seen part of the problem?
Chairman, can I just say that is a phenomenally good question. I'm delighted to say the Chief Executive will answer it.
So, yeah, it's a great question. In our research before the business case, in speaking to other authorities that have been through implementation, technology is a predominant and dominating issue. And I think Steph alluded to it before. The reality is it's going to have a very significant cost of implementation, and that's perhaps where our proposal differs from some of the others. You're right, we currently haven't identified over 600 key systems and applications. As we now get past the business case stage, we will put together a Pan-Essex technology working group that will go into essentially a diagnostic phase to make sure that we've got all the key data and evidence around systems. I suspect we will unearth more. It tends to be something that as you get into it gets more complicated, unfortunately, as you diagnose, not less. But if I can just illustrate with a couple of examples, in fact, Nick alluded to one, it is a very expensive business technology. If you look at the last corporate ERP system we implemented, that's £15 million. You know, compare that to some of the technology costs that are being proposed. The last social care case management system, I think, was £10 million. You know, these are very expensive systems, I'm afraid, and that is what's led to the estimates in our business case. You'll see that it's the majority of the implementation costs that we're proposing. In terms of capacity, it won't simply be around systems. We're definitely also going to need some specialist expertise. We're very conscious of that. But that will be something that we work with, again, on a Pan-Essex basis. This won't be a problem, particular to whether you have 3, 4 or 5. I'd argue it is much more complex the more authorities you have, because the more handoffs, the more different systems, the more different costs of fragmentation. However, it still remains a very significant challenge. And we're going to endeavour to work together, and we are definitely going to need to go out and get some specialist capacity to support us. Again, that comes from personal experience here, but it also comes from the extensive learning we've done from those who have been through this, Cumbria, North Yorkshire and others.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just texting my wife to say I'm going to be a lot later than I had anticipated. Thank you. For someone who believes that local government should be, decisions should be made at the lowest possible level, I'm really concerned about the involvement of residents when unitary authorities of 720,000 population are being proposed. It's all very well talking about these neighbourhood areas or whatever they're going to be called, but it's the top high level decisions that are going to really affect the population and our residents. So I'm really concerned about the huge mega councils that the 3 unitary option is proposing. And if I may say so, I think that to some extent that's what the majority of the districts had in mind when they started this process, when they looked at the size of the population of Essex and how that could be divided up into a reasonable size that still maintains some sort of local identity. I mean, I'm still concerned that people in Burnham on Crouch will have, for example, with people from North End, the other side of Chelmsford, for example, and that's even with the 5 unitary model. But I just have a question really for the officers, and that is that, do they agree that Grant Thornton is a highly respected organisation with considerable experience in local government transformation and has a vast amount of useful comparative data that it holds from working on other rounds of local government reorganisation with numerous other local authorities?
If I may go first, Chairman, officers, I'm sure the officers will say Grant Thornton is a highly respected organisation. It certainly is, and we've used them. There's the questions they're being asked to answer, of course, isn't it? That's what it comes down to. Look, listening to that, it sounds like we're asking for the status quo. The status quo is not affordable. It's not affordable at all. And also, the councils you're trying to create must be financially sustainable. This is the point. Your council tax intake must cover your bills. That is the fundamental question. And I think you need to take a very hard look at smaller authorities to say, will that happen, given what we're trying to do in terms of disaggregating services? But then I look at places like Manchester, North Yorkshire, Sheffield, other great cities. These are huge metropolitan councils that operate very well, and they also operate with local area committees as well, as I understand. And of course, you do sit in a council already that makes major decisions that affects people's lives of 1.5 million people. You do that already. So it does work. This is about sustainability of services. And I really have to say, if you're arguing for this, either status quo or smaller ones, can you deliver the services with the amount of demand on those services and the income you're getting? Can you really do that? And that's the question you really have to ask yourself. Yes, of course, all these proposals work. 15 councils works. Is it financially sustainable? My argument is no, it is not. Now, I'm sure the officers, you asked the officers question about Grant Thornton. Of course, they are a great organisation. My question is, what were they asked to answer?
Yes, and if I could expand on that, I think specifically quoting some elements from the business case. So I'll start at a macro level. Actually, in many domains, our financial models are very similar, and I'm sure Steph can pick up some of that detail. I'll just highlight, as Steph had done in the presentation too, where we're fundamentally different. So we're not fundamentally different on our input data, we're fundamentally different on our assumptions. The first is technology. We believe that the technology implementation costs are significant. And if you look at the proposal put forward, supported by Grant Thornton, we would argue that the implementation costs for technology are not going to go a very long way, given what we know on a factual basis are the historic and experience costs of other councils, including Essex. The second and the most important, actually, though, is pay equalisation, because the thing that tips the 5 UA business case from being perhaps more comparable to ours to saying that essentially now its position is that more authorities and a higher employee base will cost less than fewer authorities with a smaller employee base. That's a pretty fundamental conclusion, and that's for the 5 UA business case to stand by. But what tips it into that is the assumption of pay equalisation of close to £30 million per annum. And we have explained why we do not consider that to be a reasonable assumption. You can look nationally at other business cases and see if other people use that assumption, including Grant Thornton's work elsewhere. You can see if that is a legitimate assumption that has been commonly used. In our experience, it is not. And also, it's an extremely high number. I mean, 30 million is not a marginal number. 30 million, you know, take that over a period of 10 years, is a very material number to this case. And we just simply do not concur that it is correct. And indeed, the 5 UA business case itself says the pay harmonisation figures should be taken as a possible scenario, dependent on decisions made by the new unitary councils, given the difficulty of arriving at robust figures. So that isn't a quote from the 3 unitary authority business case. That is a quote from the 5 unitary authority business case. And I would say we concur with that. And therefore, we have not in our main model assumed very significant pay inflation costs. And the ultimate conclusion, I'll just kind of wrap up for us, the ultimate conclusion for us is, and where we fundamentally disagree with the 5 UA is, we believe fewer authorities with a smaller workforce costs less. That is a contrary opinion from the 5 unitary authority.
I have 2 more names who are late entrants and a couple of second bites at the cherry too, I'm sorry to say. So the first is Councillor Dobson. Sue.
Yep, I'm on. That's good. I just wanted to say there's been such a lot of information and I've been trying very hard to keep up with it all. And I think today, with the discussions that we've had, has really answered a lot of questions. So I'd like to thank officers and the leader really for such a lovely, an excellent presentation. I've tried very hard to take a holistic view of the whole process. Obviously, there is a lot of information to get there. And despite a couple of concerns that I have, I'll be interested to see how the neighbourhood delivery committees pan out. I know there's not a lot we can say about that at the moment, but it'd be interesting to see how that happens. But I believe that the government is really focused on the financial savings, and I honestly feel that the 3 option most closely matches what they are looking for. So I think it is right that we are focusing on the 3 unitary authorities. But I also want to sort of say thank you to all the officers really for the phenomenal amount of work that that you've obviously done, and I'm sure there's more to come. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, I endorse Councillor Dobson's thanks to all those who have been involved in the preparation of this material. So, Marshall, you are next.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I will. Sorry. Yes, I'd like to echo everything that's been said about not just the officers, but of course the Cabinet have been working thoroughly hard behind the scenes on all of this as well. So a great team effort is what should be applauded here. Going forward, when the unitaries, if we choose 3 unitaries, going forward, I'm just wondering at the back of my mind about how those unitaries will come to understand their responsibilities and the data that they're going to need to be able to operate through those responsibilities. I am looking at the day of vesting day, or sorry, even in 26, 7, when we spend that year, those unitaries or those shadow unitaries spend that whole year trying to get to grips with what it is they're going to be responsible for, what part they're going to play in all of that. And so I've got a couple of, if I may, just points that just need clarity in my own mind, which relate to all of those. And the first one would be probably for Nick. And he alluded to the fact that children's care services would go up by 150%, I think was a number he used. I may be wrong. Did you say something about 150% increase in numbers? I'd like to know, because you've presented today about everything is about evidence-based. You keep saying you've done everything on evidence-based. Where did that evidence come from? And coming back to when I was talking about the setting up these unitaries, will those unitaries know those numbers as well, that they're going to be, if there's a 50% increase of applications, will we be able to find out, or will those unitaries be able to find out how many of those increases will be related to those particular unitaries? The other couple of questions I've got is that there are, of course, many capital projects in the system. Again, will those unitaries know which of those capital projects are going to be aligned to them, and how they're going to actually manage those capital projects, where the money is going to come from for those capital projects? The other ones that I've got are about government actually give grants to Essex County Council. Will there be any money going to those unitaries? I.e., what will happen to those grants? What will, at the moment, you get some money to operate services here at Essex County Council, but when there's 3 unitaries, what will happen to that grant? Will we still be, those unitaries still be banging on the door at government saying, give me a grant, give me a grant, give me a grant, or not? And I think my last one was paybacks as well. The payback periods you talk about, going down, further down the road, we're going to be asked, or I would be going to be asking, you keep using phrases like our payback periods are X, Y, and Z, and we've got X amount of money, and we're going to benefit by a certain amount of money, and they're going to be, benefits downstream. Where on earth did you get those payback periods and the data that says, yes, you're going to be better off going downstream?
Chairman, a lot of in there very good questions as well. I will let Nick talk about some of the coming together and services, and maybe Steph or the chief exec to talk about the payback period. It is from evidence. We haven't just sort of dreamt that up, of course. It is from evidence. Let me just tackle the initial question around enough time. Well, of course, unitarisation has taken place across the country before under the last government quite successfully. This is a different form of unitary, but the principles remain the same. Therefore, we have been used to creating unitary councils where services are either aggregated up to a county unitary, or in the case of Northamptonshire and Cumbria, into 2 unitaries. So we have experience of this happening elsewhere, and you learn from that experience. By 27, when the elections take place in May 27, very quickly, there will be a raft of councillors elected. There will be a ruling party. There will be a leader and cabinet, leader elected, a cabinet appointed as shadows. They have no delivery responsibility because they're not actually in power yet, because they're shadow, but of course they have the power to do the formation, working with us to make sure it happens. There is lots of time. Will it all be done? Absolutely. No, but the fundamentals will be done. The implementation will be done. A lot of the rest of it will be sorted out, hence the payback period as well, before you can get to period. So it's not all we finish on May the 6th, 2028, and May the 6th, 2028, it takes over. Everything is shifted over. The vast bulk will be up and running, but there'll still be some areas to complete, and that's happening elsewhere in some of the other unitaries as well. You cannot do it overnight, it's not expected, but you have to take a long-term view as well. This will be for the next minimum 50 years, if not much longer as well. So you have to take that long-term view. On capital projects, well, it will depend is the answer. Major capital projects would come under the mayor, infrastructure projects. So, for instance, the building of Bewley Park Station, we're the only council, to my knowledge, ever that's built a railway station, and it's there. You can see it. It stops operating very, very shortly. That almost certainly that kind of project would go to the mayor. The Army and Navy roundabout is likely to go to the mayor. Major road infrastructure would go to the mayor. So that would be covered by, as you aggregate the money for that, there'll be capital programs, pots already in place. Money will be transferred, I would imagine, I'll just wait and see, to the Combined Authority and the Mayor to complete those. On grants, a lot will go into the Combined Authority. Remember, we are with the Mayor, we haven't talked anything about the Mayor of the Combined Authority, and that's almost worthy of another session, I would say, Chairman. But the Combined Authority would be given those grants by the government, or the mayor will, and puts it into the Combined Authority. And they would then apportion those out. Now, the Combined Authority is made up of the leaders of those unitary councils. So that is how that is almost certainly going to be done. If you were thinking about the highways maintenance grant that comes in to help fix potholes, I don't know absolutely how that would be done yet. Looking at others, I suspect it's either directly to that council, or again, it would go to the Combined Authority to divvy that out on need. And on payback, I'm going to ask other officers to answer that. But as I said, a lot of that is predicated on the evidence we know, not just a whim and a prayer that we think we've got that right. And we are working with our colleagues at other organisations, and our own knowledge have led us to believe these are the payback periods. So perhaps I could ask Nick to comment around, particularly around implementation of services, and then Steph maybe to talk about the payback period and how we've got to those figures.
So thank you very much for your questions, Councillor. So the first thing I would say is there's going to be an awful lot of learning for everybody to do. And I will make sure that I work really closely with the directors of social services and the other existing local authorities. And whatever the outcome, we will come together to make sure that we put a programme of learning together for everybody. Because things like corporate parenting and the demands that are coming on the system and understanding the legislation, it's incredibly important that everybody becomes literate in that. So I suspect we will be spending an awful lot of time over the next 2 or 3 years making sure everybody knows everything they need to know, and no question should go unanswered, or indeed it's too silly a question. Actually, ask away. We need to make sure that people feel comfortable and that members are responsible. So that's the first piece. We will commit to that no matter what business case is chosen. The 150% relates to education, health and care plans. They are an enormous pressure in the system. They are a pressure everywhere, not just in Essex. And I think what it highlights is actually local authorities, whatever their size and whatever their scale, will be buffeted by things that are to do with national policy. And this is very much about national policy, and those things aren't going to go away. Some of our other projections are just based on demography. So we know what proportion of the population will age plus 65. What we want to do, and this is the upstream bit, is we want them to age well. It's fantastic that people are living longer. We want them to live healthier lives. So it's really important that you have an operating model that has enough resource to get upstream and do the things that matter, because you can see in Essex a difference in life expectancy. And one of the things I would hope is that unitarisation uses its benefits to really focus on early intervention and prevention. And finally, I would just say, in terms of the costs in general, and I'm going to defer to Steph because she does the money, not me. But if you look at social care, over the last 6 years, the costs have gone up considerably, probably between 40 and 60%, depending on your measure. And an awful lot of that is inflation and wages, an awful lot. And that will be there in the new model as well. So actually the importance of delayering and driving efficiencies through will really come to the fore of the viability of the new authorities. However many they are, they will be faced with those challenges. Thank you.
So just to pick up some of the other elements of this, we have already commenced very detailed work across all partners, looking at the disaggregation of Essex County Council costs, funding, grants, reserves, capital programs. So that's an initial point in time analysis that we've been working on. That's, of course, the start of this transitional period. And as we work through this, there will be amendments, adjustments, refinements, improved positions, changes to assumptions that we'll model through collaboratively, and that will be absolutely key. Just in terms of finance officers, you know, the Essex Finance Officers Association, the chief finance officers of all the 15 authorities work very closely together. We are ready and waiting to work through this transition. On payback periods, the modelling on benefits has been, again, fairly prudent, but although we would expect in terms of transfer and learning that the majority of our staff, our processes and our contracts move into the new unitaries, you know, that would be the excellent transfer of knowledge and understanding that we would anticipate. We do see some potential staffing reductions. So senior leadership has been mentioned. Clearly, we don't want duplication of that. There will be reductions of duplications of frontline delivery, back office delivery, wherever we can find economies of scale on systems and processes. Third-party spend, if we're looking at collaboration on contracts going forward, and clearly just ECC alone, over 70% of our spend is on contracts. Property rationalisation, we've mentioned. We haven't made any assumptions about things like capital receipts to go into the capital programme. However, we have made assumptions around reduced property running costs that is deemed a benefit. And then the other element that you've been discussing quite significantly today around democracy. So the reduced costs of democracy, members' allowances, election costs, for example, are all feeding into that benefits modelling.
If I may, Chairman, as well, my cabinet member is very keen to thank Councillor Vance for thanking them.
Good. Well, thank you very much, all of you. I've got two more small bites at the cherry, who are Councillor McQuiggan and Councillor Steele. So please keep it short and carry on. Councillor McQuiggan.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very quick. We've got some phenomenal staff across the organisations across Essex, both at district level and at county level. It's been my privilege to work with staff in both of those areas. I have particular concerns about how we transition that staff and how we take care of them. I know you've addressed some of those issues, but it's of particular concern on how we get through the early part of the shadow reorganisation and then the first few years. I just wondered if we could address that.
I will ask the Chief Exec to answer that because technically, of course, staffing comes under her. However, from a political leadership point of view, I also want to make sure this is done correctly. I see this as a real opportunity for those who wish to further their career in local government. But clearly, there will not be jobs for everyone. That is just a fact of life. There'll be opportunities for other people to do other things as well. But communications is important, and I know, and I'll let the Chief Exec explain, that communications have been and are ongoing with our staff. They're not finding this out by rumour or conjecture. They know factually from the Chief Executive. Would you like to pick up?
Yes, it's something you appreciate. We do talk about frequently, not just within the county council. It's something that across all the chief execs when we're together, it's a point that's important for all of us, right? Because continuity across all our staffing bases is incredibly important. Within the county council, we've been running, I think it's a good place to start is the comms. We've been running staff workshops, manager workshops, and they've had really fantastic attendance. You know, we've had hundreds and hundreds of staff who come and we do regular updates. I think we were doing one I forget the days, but just yesterday. So there is the thing about being really open and honest. And as much of that is being honest about what we don't know, because of course, there is still ambiguity and there will be ambiguity right until, you know, the decision is made in March, until the statutory change order is laid. So there's something about being really open that staff know that we have some answers, but we don't have all the answers too. Empirically, actually, we've been very fortunate in that as yet, we're not seeing that in terms of affecting our turnover. So we do keep a very close monitor on all the kind of performance data. And again, so it's amazing the question was asked. We were literally talking about this as a leadership team before we walked into the room. We were talking about our staff retention. So I feel like someone's been spying. I don't know. No, so it's a really incredibly close thing to our managerial side. So there is bigger questions, though. We do need to continue supporting our staff to develop. There are going to be, for many of our staff, things like frontline social workers, the majority of our staff are not going to have a fundamental change in their day-to-day role, but many others, for them, things are going to change. And it will be important for us to continue to support and invest in those staff development to give them the best opportunity to thrive in the new organisations. And at the right time, we'll come forward with that. But we are internally looking at what our staff management leadership development programmes are, because vesting day is a long way away, actually. I mean, there's going to be a lot of work to be done, but it is 2028 and we need to take our staff on that development journey. I'll say less at this point about how we'll do work in the system, because we're yet to come together to define all the detail of the work streams. But just to assure, this isn't just a county council challenge. We will definitely be working across the chief executives in the system to look at how we do that together. I mean, we've got good stuff to build upon. We have the Essex Partnership Leadership Academy. So there are some things already out there that we can continue to sweat.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to add my thanks for the presentation today. It's kind of the unfortunate nature of scrutiny that we all seem to sit here being critical and picking out the holes or whatever. So, but that is the nature of scrutiny, I think. I just want to pick up on some things that have been, an issue that's been raised by several people, and I'm not sure we've got the point over, and it's to do with the local decision making, and it's especially more important when we're looking at a 3 model rather than the 5 model, because there's a danger of it drifting away from a local. And I'm going to put my concern into an example. I'm not sure I necessarily need an answer, but it's just, this is how I feel, and perhaps some of the other members feel. If I take an example of how we work at the moment, and I take the Members Highway Initiative, I feel that I have total power in selecting which potholes get fixed first through the MHI. That is, I think that's as close as it can possibly get to being local decision making. But from the presentation, I found out that if I am a unitary councillor at some point in the future in Chelmsford, I will be one of 21 unitary councillors. So I've got 20 other people to convince as to which potholes we fix first in the Chelmsford area. So that feels like a loss of local power. And I think that kind of needs to be addressed if, for us to support the 3 model, because of the danger of other councils feeling that loss. Thank you.
So thank you for the question, and also thank you for the MHI, because actually that's something this administration put into place. Now, the one thing I would say is that that's not what I said, because the powers being devolved down, perhaps I need to be clearer. The powers being devolved down do not include highways maintenance. There is nothing to say a new unitary cannot do the MHI scheme. So you as an individual unitary councillor still have that say about doing that. The neighbourhood delivery panels will not be doing, as I understand it, and what we've written down, highways maintenance. They might be doing things like fixing a signpost. They might be doing things like cutting the grass, but road repairs, there are certain rules and regulations around fixing repairs on the actual road. You can't just go along and do that locally yourself. Otherwise, every parish council could just do that, couldn't they, if they were doing that? So there needs to be a certain level of control, which will be held at the unitary council status. But of course, it's up to you, if you are a new unitary council, to persuade your new unitary council, if they're not doing it already, to carry on the brilliant work of Essex County Council in the MHI scheme. But the delivery panel would not be doing that. That would be held at the unitary level and under the control of their cabinet member for highways.
So, Carlo.
the proceedings. It would be wrong of me if not to mention the fact that my current division, and I've never been one to be native and do my personal thing, but because it's in the agenda, the Neighbourhood Delivery Committee, there's no mention of where I represent half of the parish councils in tendering, and yet the area identified does not take into consideration the largest garden community underway and 3 more potential garden villages that are going to come out through the emerging local plan. So it would be good to have something closer to, whether this can be revisited at some stage or not. I don't expect any major changes, but I would like you, Leader, to consider that, because it is one of the fastest growing area in the North tendering. Thank you.
So I'll just take this opportunity as I answer that question to say, and to Councillor Steele, this is what scrutiny is all about. This is a good scrutiny session. Scrutiny sessions that take 10, 15, 20 minutes are not good scrutiny sessions. I expect it to take 2 hours and more. And I don't know, but I think we're the only council to put our plans through scrutiny. I might be wrong, I don't know. But certainly I'm pleased we have, and that was my decision as leader to make that happen. I wanted members to have the chance to scrutinise what we were doing, and not just at full council meetings. So please ask your questions. You're not being negative. You're asking questions that concern you. If they concern you, they concern your residents. And that's why you should be doing that and scrutiny. This is a good scrutiny session. To answer the question, well, look, we can only put into place what we know. It will be for the future unitaries to decide how they're going to look at neighbourhood delivery committees for future garden communities, such as the tendering Colchester garden border thing must get a better name, all right, than that. I'm being quite serious, must get a better name, all right, seriously. However, the concept is exactly the same, that we must let the unitaries do that in the future. That, of course, as you have more residents, and part of the boundary reviews, which I'm sure will take place within 2 years or so of the new unitaries in place, will take that into consideration. So we can't quite plan for that because we don't know the building numbers, how it's going to pan out. We have a plan, but we don't know exactly when the numbers are coming on stream, when residents will be there. So that's for futures unitaries to do. What I would say, though, is that if they follow our model, it will be a success.
Thank you once again, Leader, other Cabinet members and the officers. We are totally convinced by the amount of work and thought that has gone into this. I, speaking for myself, have some residual doubts on the question of the neighbourhood committees and their likely efficacy, but I can reserve that for the full council next week and possibly Cabinet afterwards. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, members, for your intelligent and persistent questions.